Welcome to Advanced Data Analysis 1 with me, Erik Erhardt, Professor of Statistics at the University of New Mexico. In this video, I'll help get you started with Class 6, which is plotting univariate, so plotting one variable at a time, and coding missing values and labeling factor levels. That's the full assignment. This video will focus just on plotting one variable at a time, both categorical and numeric, and the next video will focus on coding missing values and labeling factor levels. So here we are down here. If there isn't a set of RMD files like this for the next assignment, then all the content is in your outline file. So that's where we're going to look right now. So let's go over to RStudio. That window shifts over every time I switch over. All right, and I'm going to open the file that we finished with last time, and we will save this file with a new name so that we are giving ourselves some revision control. And let's knit it to make sure that it's working. So it's always sort of good practice to start with a file that you know is working to begin with. That way, if anything breaks, you know it's something that you just recently did. All right, so let's open this file in the browser and make this a little bigger. Command plus and minus makes the text larger and smaller in most browsers. So class 6 is down here under section 5, under graphing and tabulating. Here's class 6. I'm going to click on it to jump down there. All right, so the 4 items for today's assignment are to, for one categorical variable, create a bar plot and label the axis and give it a title. And then finally interpret the relationships that we see. Then we will also plot a numeric variable using a histogram or a box plot. We'll probably do the histogram, but maybe we'll do both just for fun. Again, label the axes and always give it a title, and we'll interpret the plot. And in the next code, or in the next video, excuse me, we'll code missing values and label factor levels. All right, so where are we going to get our work here? Right below us are the categorical variables for plotting. We've got tables for categorical variables and graphing those, and then we have numeric variables, graphing them. I guess it looks like I've got a section also on creating density plots. So we'll do those sections today. In the next video, we'll scroll up to the data management section to deal with the coding missing values and labeling factor levels. All right, so how do we get started? Always, we'll go to the website and we'll scroll up above the timetable to the example assignments. I'm going to pull from this HTML from previous year's projects, but you can choose to go there or go to the current file that I'm working on here for your work. All right, so this document is laid out very similarly. I'm going to scroll down a little bit to graphing and tabulating. Here's the categorical variables and here's the numeric variables. Great, so I'm just going to click on graphing and tabulating. And there's some description here about using functions such as table or X tabs. You're supposed to read it as cross tabs for cross tabulation. That's when you've got more than one variable and you want to compare two sets of categorical variables together and frequencies, such as your sex by eye color. Okay, so you've got a column for men, a column for women, and then rows for blue, hazel, brown, and then that elusive, my eyes change color depending on the weather. All right, so we're going to choose some variables and start with just some categorical tables, and then we'll go on to producing those using the same frequencies to create plots. So let's take a quick look at these tables. Looks like I'm going to use tobacco dependence. Okay, and notice I've already, in this example, I already have my factor levels labeled with what they mean, right? So I've got nicotine dependence and no nicotine dependence. In my current data set, these are going to be 0 and 1 or 1 and 2. And so our initial tables will have different labels at the top, but no problem. Here we are, we've got the NISARC underscore sub. That's our subset of the data set. It includes only the columns for the variables that we are interested in. In the last assignment, we renamed these to have nice names. So here's my nice name. And the $sign is a way to specify a column within a data set. So this says, from the NISARC sub data set, choose the column with the name tobacco dependence, and then create a table. All right, so I'm just going to grab this code right here, these 2 lines, and copy, bring it over to RStudio, and now I need to find where in here the graphing is. I can search very quickly for class 06 and go to the next one until we get to class 06, plotting univariate. Okay. So I brought up the find window with Control F, or you do Command F on a Mac. And then I typed class 06. All right, so let me scroll down a little bit. Here are the places for the categorical variables and the tables. So I'll insert chunk, Control-Alt-I. I'm going to start using that keystroke, Control-Alt-I, instead of always going up to the code. Control-Alt-I. Nice. And I'm going to paste. Now what you would do is you've got your NISARC subset, and you would find one of your categorical variables and put its name here. All right. So how would I do this if I were you? Let's see. We're around line 545. Okay. So I'll scroll up to the codebook. Okay, so here's the top of my codebook. I'll scroll up just a tiny bit more for the header. There's the codebook. And then you choose one. So here is a smoking status, right? So here's the number of cigarettes smoked, whether they've when they've smoked. Here's tobacco dependence. Okay, so I think that's the one that I'm looking at. 0 here is no nicotine dependence, and 1 is nicotine dependence. I should probably rename this variable to nicotine dependence, but I'm sort of stuck with it based on my previous example. All right, so let me scroll down now back to 545, line 545. There we are. All right. I'm going to show you also in this video how to start interacting with the data in the console. Okay. Here are the key things that you need to do. And if you're taking, this is a great place to take notes at this part. Now, first thing we need to do is set the working directory. Go up to Session, Working Directory, to Source File Location. That will open up the console and set the working directory to the folder where I'm getting my where the data where my RMD file is, where my markdown file is. That is also this location where the data are, right? The data are. It's one single data file, but data is a plural name. Anyway, so there's the folder. and I need to set this working directory so that it knows where to find the data file, and it also later on, if we end up writing out output, such as saving plots or saving tables, then it has a default place to put those things where we'll be able to find them easily. So it's set that working directory. We can check it out. dir stands for directory. If I do dir, these are the same file list that we were just looking at. Okay, so we know we're in the right place. Now we can run code chunks with these play buttons here, and that's what happens when you click knit. It goes through the entire document and it runs all the code chunks, and then it weaves together the output from the code chunks as well as all the text that is written here. So I'm going to scroll up to the very top and just sort of give you an idea of what happens when you run code. So I'm going to scroll down. We'll find some code chunks. Here's the first code chunk. It's gray, and you can copy and paste these commands with Command C and go down here and do paste, Command V, and run those commands. And that, what I just did, I changed the knitter option chunks for comment, message, etc. Another way to run them is to put your cursor on there, and I wonder if it's up here. Control Enter. When you press Control Enter on a line or on a selection, it will also run those lines. Okay, so here I'm going to highlight line 87, and I'm going to press Control Enter. Control Enter. Oh, you know what? It's highlighted. It highlighted it strangely. Okay, knitter by itself isn't a thing. Okay, Control Enter, and it will run. It basically copies this line down to the console and executes it. I'm going to do it one more time. You can see where the cursor is blinking. Control Enter. It submitted it to the bottom and ran that line. Another way is to highlight code that you want like this and press Control Enter. That will send the whole chunk down there. And another way is to press this play button up here, Run Current Chunk. And it will copy the whole thing, including all the comments, down there, just as you see it above, right? I set some global R chunk options here. I set some global R chunk. Right, all the stuff is right here. Okay. And the reason why you need to run the code chunk starting from the top is because code below depends on the code that you ran above. In particular, let's scroll through until we find the next code chunk. Here we go. We need to load the tidyverse, we need to load the data, etc. Okay? When we're working down below, where we are, okay, so recall the things that we're doing here, we're reading in the data set, then we are selecting the columns that we care about, and then we are renaming those columns, and that's basically it. That's what we've done so far. And we've done this summary. Oops. All right. So if I want to start working down here, I need to run all that code above. And the way to get current is to run this line here. Run all chunks above. Okay. Make sure. Okay. Notice up here under the Environment tab in the top right, the environment is empty, meaning we haven't created any objects yet. But as soon as I run this, run all chunks above, it's going to run all those lines, and it's going to create some objects here. So let's watch that happen. Click it. It's doing the library tidyverse. It's loading the data set. We'll see it appear up in this upper right-hand corner. We also have the subset. So let's take a peek. In the environment, the original data set is still there with 3008 variables. The subset we have is 13. Okay. And we're ready. When I clicked run all chunks above, it did not run this chunk. Instead, I'm ready to run this chunk now. So I'm going to make my console a little bit bigger, and I'm going to press Control Enter on that line, and I've got a table now with 0 and 1, 38,000 zeros, and about 5,000 ones. Let's take a peek at what the original result was. About 900 and about 800. So that's because in this project I did some additional data management steps. In particular, I limited my data set down to people who were 25 years old and younger. And I have not done that yet, and I probably will not do it for this class. Anyway, there we go. I've got a table of a categorical variable. That is enough for this assignment. So let's go on to do graphing. I want to graph this relationship. Now, quite honestly, if I only had two categories with two numbers, I would not create a plot. I would just report those two tables. It doesn't make sense to create a large visualization. However, if you've got 6 or 8 categories and you want to show the relationship between them, a plot starts to become increasingly valuable. All right, so I'm going to show you an example with only 2 categories, but I encourage you to choose a variable with more than 2 categories, so if that's what you're interested in. You know what? I want to show you one more thing. So here, this first plot was just the frequencies, but often it's more interesting to compare the proportion of the total. Let me grab the second set of code, and I'm going to add that to the same code chunk right there. And what is happening here is I've got the same table line, okay, which produces these frequencies that we see in the console window. And then we use the tidyverse pipe command, which you can read with the words and then. So create the table and then produce a proportion table. So I'm just going to have my cursor on this line and press Control Enter, and down below we see now the proportions in each category. We have about 88% versus almost 12%. All right, so this is the type of relationship we should see in the plot that we're about to create. Let's go do it. I'm going to scroll down. There are some additional comments here about how to use some of these functions. But we're going to focus on graphing the frequency tables. So here is a plot that we're creating. It has, it's very basic. It's got a bar chart with the frequencies on the y-axis and the 2 categories represented for the variable that's named at the bottom, tobacco dependence. I'm going to scroll down a little bit more, and I think I show a couple examples here. One I've got where I rotate the labels at the bottom so that they don't run across each other. If they were horizontal, these labels are too wide and they end up covering each other up. So I've rotated them. I also have not available, some missing values on the axis, and I've got a comment here about how to remove those. In particular, use this command, and I'll probably talk about that in a later video. And then final versions. Okay, so I go through a few, I go through an exposition of how to build up a plot, but I recommend that you just start here at the final version, because we have all of our labels that we need to fill in and no additional stuff. Okay. Notice here I've removed the variable label because I've basically included it in the title. And the category labels sort of tell you enough. Total number is what I've put as a label for the y-axis. All right, so let's grab this chunk of code and go over to RStudio and put it under the graphing frequency tables section. So a new code chunk, you'll recall, is Control-Alt-I to insert a code chunk, and I'm going to paste that code in here. All right, so this is another quirk that I do but you actually don't need to library ggplot. Ggplot stands for the grammar of graphics. It's a grammar for graphics. You can think of as a visualization as being a visual language, where information is encoded, and when you view it, you decode that information to understand it. The same way we encode words with meaning, and we make sounds, and then you decode those sounds to understand what's being said. So that's a sort of a visual language. And what's happening here is I'm starting off by creating a ggplot object. I need to specify the data set, which is nisarg_sub, and then I assign aesthetics. This is a way of encoding different visual attributes with variables. So the x-axis here is going to be encoded with the levels of tobacco dependence, 0 and 1. Then what am I going to plot? I'm going to plot bars. So geom here stands for geometric object, and the type of object is a bar for a bar plot. And then I'm going to add the labels. So the X label I'm setting as just blank, so there's nothing between the quotes. I have changed the Y label to total number, and the title that appears at the top is here. So the grammar of graphics is a layering language. So we start by basically defining the axes, right? So what's on the x-axis? Tobacco dependence. Then what am I going to plot on those axes? The bar. Then what will the labels be updated as? And then finally I print that object. So I'm going to, why don't we use some of our buttons over here. If you click this, it will run the current chunk. So I'm going to do that. Nice. So it copied and pasted the code. Let's scroll down a little bit. The code in the top source window, it copied down into the console. And when it printed it, I got the plot appearing in the plot window on the right. And I'm going to make it just wide enough so the title fits. Great. You can see the labels at the bottom are 0 and 1 because we have not yet labeled our factor levels, but we've got the total number label, nicotine dependence. Looks good. Looks like the one on the left is about 88% compared to the 12% on the right. Most of the people in this data set, you know what? I have to update this label because this is no longer for young adults. It's just nicotine dependence for adults. Okay, I'm going to show you another way of running this. I'm going to highlight it all and do Command or Control Enter. There, I've now updated the title. The previous plot, you can go back with this back arrow. Okay, and then forward. And when you're done with the plots, you can sweep them clean, or you can delete just a single plot. I usually just sweep all of them clean. All right, so we've got a nice looking plot. We've done several things now. Let's go and knit the document and make sure that it's still working. And we don't have to check on this very carefully. I'm just going to scroll down and click on class 6. I'm not going to bother opening it in the browser, is what I'm saying. There's my table. There's my proportion table. And here is my plot. Looks pretty good. You know what? Sort of right now, I probably do need a label on my x-axis down here. So let me go back and tidy that up. We'll just call it nicotine dependence. And put that in there. And if we run that chunk, now we've got nicotine dependence on the x-axis. All right, things are looking good. That is the first plot. This video is getting long. I'm going to stop it here and we'll come back and do the numeric variable. Right before we do that, let's scroll up and make sure that we are satisfying the learning requirements for this, the rubric for this assignment. this is the 1. All right, plotting univariate. All right, for one categorical variable, a bar plot is plotted with the axis label and the title. Interpret the plot. All right, let's definitely go and do that to finish this video. So the nice thing about the rubric is you have the opportunity to grade yourself to see whether you've met all of the part of the rubric. Now I'm going to start by going over to the example file and see what the example interpretation is. And I'm going to just copy this over and then we'll read it in the R Markdown. Oops, not that one. Here we go. All right, interpretation. Notice that in the over here, interpretation was bold. Okay, so we can make that bold over here as well. You'll recall from looking at the R Markdown quick reference that bold is either with double stars on either side or double underscores. Unfortunately, I tend to be a little bit inconsistent about whether I use one or the other, but here we go. I've bolded it with a double underscore. All right, among smokers. So I have not done a restriction to 25 years and younger, so I'll say among adult smokers, there are slightly more people who are nicotine dependent compared to those who are not nicotine dependent. So that is not the result for what we just saw. Instead, if I go up here and look at the proportions, so I moved my cursor up to the proportion table line and pressed Control Enter, and that submitted it down here. Now I've got some proportions to interpret. Okay. So 0 means not nicotine dependent. And so I'm going to completely change the sentence. There are, about 8 times more people, I'll say 88%, who are not nicotine dependent compared to those who are. And I'll just do a little bit of rounding and say 12%. That's it. That's a nice simple interpretation. The interpretation of a categorical plot will typically be done based on the proportions or percentages rather than the frequencies. Though if you wanted to put in a frequency, I would probably put in among adult smokers. You could say n equals, and we have to go and count them up. Okay, so we have a table up here. Here's the table. All right, there's my table. Now, how could I count them up? Well, one way, let's, okay, there's my table code. Create the table and then calculate the sum. That has added them together. Now that's probably the same as the number of rows of the Nisark subset, and it is. Okay, so everyone either has tobacco dependence or not. But now we've at least confirmed that that number. All right. Oh no. Be careful how you click. All right, here we go. N equals that number. You know what? I'm going to improve this slightly. This video is never going to end. Sorry, everyone. These numbers might change. If we were to, up in our data management section, do a subset where we filter the rows based on some criterion or something like that, then these numbers could change. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this number compute based on our code. Okay. So how would I do that? I use the left inverted comma. So that's the key right under your escape key in the top left corner of your keyboard. And in there, if you put the letter R and then a space, when you knit this document, it's going to interpret whatever command comes next using the R language. Well, we know that if we run this, we'll get the total number of people who are represented in these frequencies. So I'm going to paste that command in there. And you know what? I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to add some line returns, which won't actually affect the output, even if you do a little bit of indentation. Okay. Something like that. That's a little bit easier. So now it's going to say among adult smokers, N equals, and then it's going to calculate how many, among adults. Among adults, not just, we don't know that all these people are smokers. Among adults, there are, etc. Okay. There are N equals, and then it's going to calculate that number. So let's see how this works. I'm going to knit. And we'll go down to the interpretation. And here, among adults, N equals that number. That number is being computed. Let's do, I don't know, that's probably a good place to start or in this video. We could also put in these percentages from the table as well. We are going to skip that part for now. Let's see, should I do one more thing? You're saying no, probably in your heads. There's another nicer way to make these tables. It's occurring to me, especially for categorical tables. Let me go just grab some code that I have for making these tables. This is it, ftab sum. It's under my gist. And since we're just sort of doing this once, I'm not going to use the function I wrote, but we'll just put the code in here to do this. So this, if you want to stop this video now, I don't think I'm going to say anything else you need to know for this video. All right, but I'm going to create a but if you're interested in tidyverse programming, stick around. All right, so let me just clean this up a little bit. Oh, right, there we go. I highlighted all that and I pressed Shift Tab to untab everything. So I'm going to create a table for tobacco dependence. Okay. So I'm starting with the NISARC sub. And then I'm going to group this by the tobacco dependence variable. Okay, so for each, I think this is going to work. For each category of tobacco dependence, I'm going to summarize the number of people in that group. So within the tobacco dependence equals 0 group, I'm going to count the number. And within the tobacco dependence equals 1 group, I'm going to count how many people. After it does the summarize, it's going to ungroup the data. And then mutate creates a new variable. So here it's going to round or create a proportion by rounding the number in each group divided by the total number that we see. And it's going to round that to either 3 decimal places or 3 total numbers. I think it's 3 decimal places. That's probably going to be a bit too much for us. Oh no, that's okay because it's a proportion. Okay, and then we're going to arrange that in descending order I think I'm probably just going to keep them in the original order. So I'm going to comment that out, and then we'll ungroup because we've grouped initially, and so grouping sort of tidies it up, and that creates the table. And then we're going to print the table. All right. Let's see if this works. Oh, interesting. It puts this garbage in there. Well, let's see. I think we can comment that out. If you don't comment it, if it's there, if you're not, well, it didn't create a warning that time. Okay, I like that better. All right, so now we've got tobacco dependence, 0 and 1. We've got the sample sizes and the proportions all in a single table. That is much nicer output, in my opinion. And the main thing it allows you to do is it allows you very easily then to, in this output, write code to put these percentages in. But this video is getting pretty long. So anyway, that is a bonus, this little table that took 5 minutes. See you in the next video for plotting numeric variables.